Donald C. Perkins of 2915 North Cambridge, Lansing, Michigan. Don's phone number is area code 517-484-5246. The recording was made at his home by Jim Walkinshaw and Helen Earley on October 20th, 1988. This is tape 1 of 2 tapes. Don, if we could get you just to give us your name and your address and your phone number, if you would. And
my name is Don Perkins, and I retired in 1970 as the executive engineer in product engineering. I was working for John Belts. A couple of years later, he died, as you remember. And I have been out of the business now so long that I forget all the names.
Oh, that's all right.
I'm trying to remember. And but I retired in 1970. That's 18 years ago.
Okay. When did you start?
I started in 30. So I was there 40 years.
You started in 1930.
Yeah.
Okay.
What did you start in? Where did you begin?
Well, I began in product engineering, and Mr. Wolfram hired me. He hired me, strangely enough, because I could run a typewriter, not because I had an engineering degree.
Oh, isn't that something?
What were you
I
doing?
went over to see him several times, and one day I went in there, and he says, well, he caught me going down the hall after I'd thanked him and said, I'll call on you again. And he said, hey, can you run a typewriter? And I said, I sure can. And I had gone to a small grade school and then a bigger school.
Mm-hmm.
And I had a lot of room for odds and ends. So I took typing and manual training and stuff like that in my second from the graduation and the last year before graduation. So I could run a typewriter pretty good. And they sent me out to proving ground. I typed
at
Milford. And I worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, 72 hours a week, standard time.
Yeah.
No overtime.
Yeah.
I was typing reports for Carl Shook, who ran the proving ground at that time for Olds.
Was Wolfram the chief engineer at that time?
No, he was assistant experimental engineer
All right.
at that time.
Okay.
And he hired me, and I got to working around him and for him, but I never liked him too well. I guess that.
Well, did you drive to the proving ground every day?
Yeah, I rode with the crew.
I see.
And Vern Yallop was the one that hired me. And he said, well, you get down here at 6 o'clock in the morning and we'll take the proving ground. I'd never gotten up at 6 o'clock in the morning in my life. So that was a pretty hard assignment.
And then what, 4 or 5 guys rode down in the car?
Yeah, we rode down there.
Mm-hmm.
We used to stop for breakfast down around Howell someplace.
Oh, yeah.
Then Carl came along and he'd shoo us out of there and we'd go someplace else.
Mm-hmm. And then you'd come back in the evening.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And we worked 6 days a week.
Yeah.
And 12 hours a day. So I never saw Lansing in daylight except in the summertime when the days got long enough that we come back in daylight.
How long did you stay doing that sort of thing?
About 3 years. And then I came into Lansing and went in the experimental office.
Okay. What were you doing?
I was writing engineering reports.
Okay.
And then I got laid off. And
when was that?
That was in 33 when they laid off all the single guys and all the married girls. And I was a single fellow at that time. And so I got laid off in 1933, about the 1st of April, I think it was.
That approach of laying off the single folks, was that explained kind of to everybody so they understood that?
Oh, yeah, I guess so. Nobody liked it too well.
No.
Because we had to live just the same as everybody else did. But it was a little bit embarrassing because it didn't make any difference how good you were.
Mm-hmm.
We used to have a fellow in the dynamometer lab. His name was Leon Carroll. Did you ever hear of him?
No, Howard Carroll's the only one I've heard of.
Leon Carroll was a MIT graduate, and he was a drunken genius, you might say. He
Oh,
was
no.
a quart-a-day man,
Oh, no.
and he got laid off same time I did, and his father was up at the University of Wisconsin, up at Madison, Wisconsin. So he started up there, and he went through Peoria, Illinois, and they had this sulfur water in the fountains out in the street. And you or I had probably gone to the next town, but he went down to City Hall and he says, "What's the matter with your water here?" They said, "Well, we know it's got some sulfur in, but we can't get it out." He says, "I can get it out." So they give him a try at it, and he got it out already.
So he stayed down there. Uh-huh.
He became a city engineer of Peoria, Illinois.
Isn't that interesting? Now, Don, when during that 33 period, then we weren't making a lot of cars. Things were pretty tough.
Things were lowest in 32.
Yeah.
We went down and down. Our salary had been cut.
You actually took wage cuts?
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We were working for well, I started out about $140 a month, I guess, and I got down to about $85 a month
Really?
at that time.
Mm-hmm.
So it really wasn't too much of a calamity. When we got laid off, we kind of expected that every paycheck we got, you know, there might be a quit slip in it, and there was finally.
What kinds of, you were writing test reports?
Yeah.
For what kinds of subject or parts?
Oh, just test parts. It was from the proving ground. The knowledge of what was going on with the proving ground was the reason I was brought into the office there.
Okay.
And we had to make a test report on everything that was tested. And that was what we did. And these were put away, and they're probably on file yet down there, I suppose.
Might be.
Then
well, then what happened after
I was looking around. I had gone to International Harvester and I had gone to Chrysler, and I visited both of those while I was laid off.
Okay.
And I guess eventually I could have gone to either one because they both sent for me finally. By that time I was working back at the proving ground again.
When did that start?
That was about the 1st of August.
The same year?
Yeah. So they gave me the time so I wouldn't lose it on my priority. And I lived at the proving ground then. I went out there and lived that time for about 2 years.
They're doing the same thing?
Well, no, I was actually testing cars then.
Oh, okay.
And so when I finally left at that time, Carl Shook asked me whether I'd done everything I wanted to do at the proving ground before I left. And I said, no, I'd never driven a car around the track wide open. He says, the car so-and-so is out there in front, going and warm it up and get her going. And I went around the track, and it took me about an hour, I guess, to talk myself into going around there wide open, but I did.
How fast did it go?
Oh, they went faster than they do today. They went close to 100 miles an hour at that time. And then later I'd done a lot of testing out there and got pretty used to it. And then I came into Lansing again, and I had a crew in here that I took out there one day, and so they gave me a car and let me take them where I wanted to. So I put a card over the speedometer on a Tornado, and I said, how fast do you think we're going? The fastest they guessed was 90 miles an hour, and I pulled the card off, and we were doing 132 around the track. Around
that big oval.
Yeah, in the Tornado. But of course, my original try was around the little oval, not the big one. Yeah. And they had been a few slid off of there at times. So it was a little risky, I think, on Carl's part to let somebody go out there alone. But that's what he let me do. What
kinds of tests were you running on cars, Don?
Well, we run all kinds of tests. We run 1,000-mile tests.
Okay. Durability sort of tests?
24-hour tests.
You mean the car was
a lot of performance testing where we compared cars. And we knew what our car would do compared to all the other cars in the industry at that time.
So we did
did we have cars then from other car
Yes,
makers for
yeah.
comparisons at those?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
About 1936 is when they got the true 100-mile-an-hour cars.
Mm-hmm.
That was, the big Chrysler was a 100-mile-an-hour car, and the Cadillac was a 100-mile-an-hour car. The Cadillac V16, I guess,
Yeah.
or V12.
The
12,
12 or the 16.
We had both of them out there. And we used to take those cars into Detroit in the evening and drive them, and they'd let us use them. And we got along real good out there, and they took good care of us. We used to pay 50 cents a meal for our dinner, and we'd go in and eat anything we wanted out of it.
In the cafeteria?
At that time for 50 cents.
Well, did you test the brakes and
Yes.
tires on the
Yes.
cars and acceleration
Yes.
and everything?
It was all packaged. I mentioned about this Leon Carroll, but he set up a system of testing engines in the laboratory while he was here.
Mm-hmm.
And he got it set up like steam tables, to correct for atmosphere and
pressure,
temperature and pressure
Mm-hmm.
and humidity and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
And so all you had to do was run up the chart and down and get your figure there, and you had your horsepower correction automatically.
Oh, yeah.
And that's being used yet today.
Did the regimen through which you ran a car, like you drive 40 miles an hour this far and then 20 and you go over the bumpy, were those kinds of programs developed at that time, Don?
Most of them, yes.
Okay, like the Belgian block tests
Yes,
and those kinds
there
of
was the
things?
Belgian block test, but mostly the Belgian block test was one that they just took a regular driver and said, you drive the blocks. See?
Mm-hmm.
And so he went down and run around and around on the blocks.
Uh-huh.
And that would tear a car to pieces pretty fast.
Yeah,
Ours as well as everybody else's.
sure.
We had an engine that was second to none at that time, I think.
Those were the sixes
Well,
and the eights.
that was just before the rocket engine. The rocket engine then was brought up to that standard.
Yeah.
That was about 1948, I think.
For the rocket, yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Right.
So what did you do during the war then?
Well, I was a Canon installation engineer. One of the things I remember, I went up to Bell Aircraft, and there was a girl there in the office, and she says, you're from Oldsmobile, are you? And I said, yeah. She said, you see that Oldsmobile sitting out there? And I said, yeah. She said, look at the front bumper on it. It was all rusty. And I said, we got to fix that.
Mm.
So I got hold of somebody back in Lansing, and I said, send a bumper up here, a front bumper. We got a girl here that's got a rusty one, and it's bad. So they sent it up there. And that was our way to, that was our excuse to get in that organization.
Uh-huh.
We got in pretty good after that.
We were putting our guns in those planes?
Yeah, in the P-39.
Oh, yeah.
They had a new P-63 up there that I was working on with a new gun. It was a heavier gun than the 20 millimeter. This was a 37 millimeter. And the 37 millimeter was in the P-39, but this one was a belt-fed, faster gun than the one that they had. They had one fire about 9 shots, and we had one that would fire about 25 shots or so. And we measured up the airplane up there. And I went back to put the installation in. There was 4 airplanes at the time I measured it up, and there was only one left. So we had just one choice, and that was all. We had to work nights almost to get it in there.
See, the P-39 was a, what, was that a single engine
It was
plane?
an Airacobra,
Okay.
and it was the one that fired through the spinner.
Through the propeller?
Yeah.
Oh, no, through the spinner,
Yeah.
through the center of the spinner. Oh, yeah.
We did have a contract with the Ordnance Department then to fire the 20 millimeter through the propeller. And we closed that out by showing them how it was done. And we took it down to Wright Field. And Wright Field had a similar contract. And they were the engineering center for the airplanes. And they had fired 39 shots and shot up 13 propellers, which is about the average for no synchronization at all. And so we took this device in that we had, we found out through high-speed movies what was going on.
Mm-hmm.
It was misfiring
Mm-hmm.
when they got ahead of battery. And so we took the device to right field one day, and they had General Wells and some of those fellows up in Washington. And they said, well, do you want a new propeller on? We said, yeah, I'll put a new propeller on. So we put that on. They said, do you want about 10 shells in? We said, no, put in 1,500. And we shot 6,000 rounds that day without any trouble
Uh-huh.
and showed them how to do it.
Uh-huh.
And about, a couple of weeks later, I got a letter that said that at the close of the war, that was the only device that was successful in synchronizing that gun.
How did that, was that a mechanical device?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We found out that anytime the gun was ahead of battery, it was on its own.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when it misfired.
Okay.
So we fixed it up so that the gun could never fire ahead of battery.
What does a head of battery mean?
Well, the battery is where the gun sets before it recoils.
Okay.
And that's the natural position of the gun.
The resting position.
Yeah, but it would go into recoil, and then it would go ahead of battery, and then it would bounce back.
Uh-huh.
And during that time, it would misfire, and that's when they got the bad shots.
Oh, yeah.
And we discovered that with the high-speed movies that we
Uh-huh.
had on it.
And so you folks, did we do the development work then on the device, the
Mhm.
mechanism?
Yes, we did.
Mhm.
And
Did you work on that sort of thing then,
Yes.
Don, itself? Like
I probably had about as interesting a job during the war as there was.
Mhm.
And I had had a little row with Wolfram before that. He didn't want to put me on any gun, I guess, but he did finally put me
Uh-huh.
on the 75 millimeter. And then when we had an integration committee, and we had the ordnance people here at Oldsmobile.
Yes.
And I was on that with him, and he was the chairman of it. So I made peace with him pretty good at that time.
Now, what was the 75, that was?
75, I was the standards engineer on the
Okay.
75 to start
All right.
with, but I
Mhm.
was taken off of that, and some of the other fellows were put on it.
Uh-huh.
I don't remember too many of the names, but
So we made 20 millimeters
37
and 37
75.
and 75.
And then we got the prints for the 3-inch gun, which was almost identical with the 75.
Okay.
And we marked those prints up and took them to Watervliet Arsenal
Mm-hmm.
and told them that they should be modernized. And they says, you're not going to build it, why worry about it? And he said, okay, we'll give them to you for what they're worth. We won't worry about it. I went down there at a later time, and they said, we got something to show you. And they showed me all these prints that they'd taken our markings and they'd put on every one of them.
Mm-hmm.
So the prints were just like the 75 that we were running.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, the 75 millimeter, we got up to about 25 a day, if I remember right on that.
What was that gun used in?
That was in the
Was that
tank.
the
It was a
tank?
tank gun.
Okay.
It was used in the belly of the bombers for the strapping ground.
Oh, because that's a pretty good sized shell.
Yeah, it's 3-inch.
Yeah.
It's 2 inches,
Yeah, a little under.
950.
Yeah,
So it's
yeah.
right up 50 thousandths below 3-inch.
So that was like the Sherman tank gun?
Yes.
Okay.
That had the 75.
Did we make the whole gun?
We made the whole gun.
The barrel and the
Mhm.
breech
Yeah.
and however the loading mechanisms
Yeah.
or whatever.
We made everything.
Do you know where we made that in the plant?
Well, in the old assembly line area,
That was made in the old assembly
Yeah.
plant.
John Dykstra was here, and he was in
Okay.
charge of that.
Uh-huh.
And we went down to Watervliet one time, which was the arsenal that we reported to. And he had about $1 million worth of breech rings that were out in dimensions that didn't mean anything. They were
Mhm.
out in the air, you know.
Yeah.
He says, well, shall I ask him about it? I said, it won't do any harm. He asked him about him. And he also was bogged down on machining. So he wondered whether they could do any machining for him. And I remember that conversation. He asked the general down there, he said, supposing we send some breech rings down here, could you machine them for us? He says, yeah, I guess so. He said, when can you have some here? John says, there's 3 of them down at the express office right now. And he said, well, when can you have a few more? And he says, well, tomorrow morning there'll be a carload here and there'll be a man with them. And John, they were bad, and neither did he. They were just sparring back and forth.
Uh-huh.
But that's the way we got the thing in production. But they were making about one gun a day down there at the arsenal. They were hand doing it.
Uh-huh.
We were machining them up, all with those big lathes and everything.
Yeah.
And we got up to about 25 a day.
And then where were the 20 and the 37 millimeter guns
Well, the
made?
20 millimeter was the gun that was used in airplanes.
That was a wing gun?
That was the wing gun. It was used in both sides of the P-38.
Okay.
It was free firing where it would be free of the propeller.
Yeah.
And then, as I say, we synchronized that gun to put it through the propeller
Yeah.
on some of the guns.
Where was it made in the plant?
It was made, well, it was all gun plant at that time, right where the assembly plant is now.
Okay. It wasn't.
Building probably 34 and 33 and.
Okay, the engine plant as we would know it today.
Yeah,
Okay.
They had those big lathes in there.
Mhm.
I know that Tom Darnton worked on the big lathes
Mhm.
and bought the tools, and so did some of the others. I can't think. Monahan was one of them.
Okay.
Phil
And-
Monahan.
Yeah, and I can't think.
Art, right? Was he? No,
I think he was,
he wasn't here yet.
but I can't think of Don's name. He was at
Burnham.
Oh, Burnham.
Don
Don
Burnham.
Burnham. He
Yes.
became chairman of the board of Westinghouse.
Yes.
He was down at Waterville when we used to go down there. We used
Mhm.
to see him down there and plant. And we went down there mainly in 42
Okay.
because I was on the gun at that time, and then it was after that that I went into the cannon installation.
Did they, during the war, was there any work done on cars at all, or was it all mobilized into guns?
Well, everything was guns.
Mhm.
One example was Tom Loring went down to Eastern Aircraft and became their chief engineer.
Mm-hmm.
So he sent for Wally Wilson. Wally Wilson was on the board,
Yeah.
on the drafting board. He came down there, and then Tom was sent for and he came back to Lansing to resume car production. And Wally Wilson became the chief engineer of Eastern Aircraft.
Hmm.
When he came back, he could be demoted no more than one step. So he became Tom's boss.
Interesting.
And during that little exchange of responsibilities, he became Tom's boss. But
Mhm.
they worked it out among themselves pretty good. And Wally left, and went to the West Coast, and then he went to the corporation.
Right.
He didn't come back to Olds anymore at all.
Well, in the war, when did we start swinging then from war production back to thinking about cars?
About the first year of 46,
Okay.
yeah.
So we didn't build any cars in the.
They didn't build that,
calendar
they built 42s. We had a crew of 42 cars, a crew of them that we used for the gun work.
Mm-hmm.
And some of those cars had 270,000 miles on.
Oh my goodness.
Back seats were all worn out from carrying guns around and stuff like that. We used to drive them to the proving ground and test guns out there.
Now, you fired guns at the proving ground?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
we had an open range out there.
Okay.
And of course, we had an underground range here at Lansing.
Out in the yard there.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Did you get into that underground range
Yeah,
during
a little bit. Not very much, because I had little to do with the automatic gun. That was
Okay.
mostly 20 millimeter.
Okay.
But we did fire some 75 or some 37s there.
Did you?
The 75s were fired at the Erie Proving Ground, and we blew the back end out of one of those and
Ooh.
almost killed a couple of guys. But that was the time Wolfram was in charge, and he had a heart attack at that time. And I remember that Dave Ralston was in charge. And we reported to him, I was down there the day they blew the gun up.
What caused it to blow?
Well, they had welded the breech ring and it blew.
Oh, split.
Yeah, and so they got a specification that they didn't dare do that on
Yeah.
a gun that was ever going to be fired.
We never fired any of those big guns at the plant, around the plant.
No, we never fired. We fired 37s in the underground,
Yeah.
and we fired 37s at the proving ground.
Uh-huh.
But we never fired a 75
Uh-huh.
except at the arsenal.
Okay.
Did we ever make 105 millimeter gun?
No, we had the prints on that at one time, and I think we quoted on it. Of course, those quotations were more than Uncle Sam could stand at that time. They were $20 million
Mhm.
for tooling up a gun.
Yeah.
And of course, my theory is that somebody must have told our president that the Pentagon won the war, but Pentagon didn't win the war. Industry won the war.
Right.
Well, Don, did we ever build any cars in the late 1945? You say the car
No,
production
we
began?
we didn't have any 45 model or any 44 or 43.
We didn't even start a 1946 model in late calendar of
Well,
1945.
that's when Tom was sent for, is to come back and start a 46, and that was probably started in 45, but it was a 46 model.
Yeah.
There was no 45s or 44, 43s. 42s were run to the limit when they closed the car production out. And they run about maybe 40 cars for our use.
Mhm.
And we run those cars till wheels dropped off of them almost.
Did you at that time, did they keep the garage running for
Yes.
repair and that sort of
Yeah.
thing?
The garage was just that,
Yeah.
was a repair station.
What did you do with the, what I'll call the engineering test facilities, the engine test and dynamometers? Did those just all lay idle?
They laid idle,
Uh-huh.
but they were fired up again when they decided they were going to build some more cars.
Okay.
And the 46 car was a great improvement over the 42. I remember that. It was a beautiful car compared to 42. 42 had a bunch of sheet metal up in front,
Yeah,
you know.
the grill was
bumper.
kinda, yeah.
No bright bumpers or
Yeah.
anything. 46 was a beautiful car.
No,
compared to that.
it basically was a 42 sheet metal wise, wasn't
Yes.
it?
All they changed was the grill on
Yeah.
the front end. They just took the front end off and put that cheap one, threw it away,
Yeah.
and then they got a
Yeah.
good one on there.
So we had kept apparently all of the tools and the dies stashed away somewhere.
I remember the 46 and the 47 and 48 were all about the same. That
Yeah.
was. They didn't change it very much.
Now, was there at that time then, right after the war, was there a big fever pitch to try and get a new kind of car other than the old 42 redone for 47
No.
and 8?
No, a 46 car, you had to put in your order and you waited 18 months and then you got your car.
Oh, gee.
I remember I ordered a 46 car and I
Mhm.
got one. That was Elsie's first car.
Did you get a 46 or did you get a 47?
I got a 46
Huh.
and then I got a 48,
Uh-huh.
but you couldn't have a 47 if you had a 46.
Uh-huh.
And I got a 50 or 48, 49, 50.
Uh-huh.
This questionnaire that came out about the same time your letter came out asked how many Oldsmobiles we owned, 5 or more. And I put a note down at the bottom of that. I said, I've had over 60 Oldsmobiles in my
Uh-huh.
time.
That's a pile.
Record.
I got 4 of them right now.
Did Don, when the war ended, then what did you end up having to do?
Well, war ended and Skinner was there.
Okay.
And Skinner and Younger didn't get along, so Younger left.
Okay.
And he finally ended up at Ford, and he took a bunch of people with him, including my boss. My boss was Howard Currier, who was a chassis engineer.
Okay.
I became chassis engineer, and the same thing happened to Gilbert Burrell. He became motor engineer.
Oh.
And about that time, Estes came in as his assistant.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went from chassis over to experimental, and Estes took my job as chassis engineer.
Okay.
And then
When would that have happened about?
that would be about 50.
50? Okay.
52 maybe or
All
something
right.
like that,
Mm-hmm.
early 50s. I remember 54, I was working in experimental,
Mm-hmm.
and I know that in 47 I was the chassis engineer at that time. Um,
The chassis work during that time, see, we had, that was an all coil spring chassis.
yes,
Okay. Uh, we then must have done a significant amount of work to get us to the 49, the Futuramic.
yes. That was our first fully redesigned car,
Okay.
49.
Can you share with us some of you must have had some trials and tribulations of that time frame.
Well, I mentioned about the airlift. The airlift was developed out of necessity for hauling trailers
Okay.
on the 46 through 49 cars.
All right.
And I conceived the idea of putting an inner tube in a coil spring like you put a bladder in a football.
Uh-huh.
And I blew it up. And I was able to carry about twice the load by putting that device in the. Were able to drive fast.
Right.
See, they didn't have any speed limit at that time. I was going proving ground one day and I went around the long curve out by Howell, and there was a hay wagon came out in front of me.
Oh no.
I had a chance to look down my speedometer and I was going around that curve at just 100 miles an hour.
Oh dude.
And we never paid any attention to any speed limits at that time. All the time that I was commuting at the proving ground, we didn't have any speed limit. We had to be careful going through the towns, but out in the open, we went as fast as we wanted to go.
See, Don, when the rocket came along, did we have to do some significant work on the chassis to have it accept that kind of an engine?
Well, I don't think so, no. The first test on the rocket engines was in the old cars, was in the 48s.
47,
47, 48s.
Mm-hmm.
I know that I went up to Mayo for the first time at that time, and I took a 47 car up there, and it had a rocket engine in, nobody knew it. But it was a sweet running automobile at that time. That was one of 25 times I went up there.
Well, okay. What happened then after now you changed down to the from chassis engineer to the experimental shop, and then what happened?
Well, I mentioned, that I was offered the body engineer's job.
Okay.
And I turned it down because I just got over to experimental and I liked that pretty well. And Estes took the body engineer's job. The next time it was offered, I took it, but he was my boss. So that's when he went through our place there, like that. He made all the good moves, and he was a smart fellow. And I was on vacation when he actually left. When I came back, he was gone. So Purdue was over Pontiac.
And then from then on, what happened after the body engineer business?
Well, he became.
No, you.
Oh, I was I was body engineer for about 5 years, for about 55 to 60.
All right.
I was body engineer, and he was my boss.
Okay.
And we used to go down there and look him over, and we generally stood in kind of in the background. And he decided what was good and what wasn't. And Wolfram was his boss.
Okay.
He went down with us too. I remember one time I commented on a shade of paint there. Wolfram says, "You stick to your engineering. We'll decide the paint." So that took care of that.
He didn't like that comment.
No.
Yeah. What kind of a guy was Wolfram?
Oh, he didn't have any friends around there, I don't think. But he was a tough guy to work for. And he was quite exacting, but the thing that I objected to most for him was that if he got in a rut, why he'd go down the hall and he'd grab the first guy he saw and have him work on something.
Just even if the guy was working on other subjects?
Yeah, he took a little liberty with one of my responsible jobs that way one time, and we had a little row about it.
Mm-hmm.
But he said, "How you coming?" This was a splice shield on the back of the car, and I had bumpers and bodies, so
Uh-huh.
it fell in my category. And he'd gone down the hall and he'd picked up a few guys to work on it, and he had about 3 or 4 of them working on it. And they'd taken all the cars. We didn't have any cars that time to spare, and so he asked me to test out some stuff that I had, and I went to Burn Yellow after cars, and there wasn't any.
Hmm.
So he come around, he said, "How are you coming with this bumper thing?" I said, "I'm not coming." He said, "What's the matter?" I said, "No cars." They said, "I understand you got everybody working on it, including the guy in the coal room." His face turned a little red, and he said, "Well," he said, "when you got to do something for the general manager, you can't wait for your organization." And I told him,
Mm-hmm.
I said, "Your organization isn't worth a darn unless you can use it when you get into a pinch like that." And I said, "Well, I'm not working on it because there's too many people on it now." So I knew I was going to get a call up the office, and I did. But he called me up there and he said, "What did you have in mind for the bumpers?" I told him I had a couple of things that I wanted to try out. He said, "We ought to check those." And so he called the Gallup up on the phone. He says, "Take these other guys off." He says, "Don will work on that job."
Hmm.
And he backed me up on it then.
Mm-hmm.
But he never forgot it because I brought it up down in the garage where I shouldn't have probably. But
How about Estes?
well, Estes was quite ambitious, but he was much more fair than that.
Mm-hmm.
Estes was the guy that would tell Wolfram on Monday morning that he got a little job done Saturday. He wouldn't mention that there was a few Don Perkinses in there or somebody like that.
Mm-hmm.
So
10 other people.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it didn't make any difference whether it was the Michigan State, Michigan day to play football or not.
Mm-hmm.
If you ever asked to come in there, you better be there.
So was he a demanding sort of individual,
Yeah,
Estes was?
He was. And but it was all to show what he could do over the weekend like that.
Mm.
But he was quite demanding.
Mm-hmm.
But he was much more fair about it than some of the other people, I would say.
Did he circumvent the organization like Wolfram did to try and accomplish tasks?
No, I don't think so.
Mm-hmm.
Estes had a philosophy that was very good. When I became body engineer under him, I said, "Well, I don't know whether I can do anything on the trim and stuff like that and the paint." He says, "If I can do it, you can do it." That was his theory. And that was his theory for everybody ahead of him, too.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the reason he got where he did in Pontiac and so forth. He went from Oldsmobile assistant chief engineer to Pontiac chief engineer.
Mm-hmm.
Then he became their general manager. Then he went to Chevrolet as their general manager. And then he went up in the corporation and became president.
Yeah.
And all the time while we were, of course, watching his projects,
Mm-hmm.
and we liked what was going on, but we weren't really a part of it. They've got a good one there now. And Bob Stemple, who used to be at Olds too, you know.
Yeah, did he work with you by any chance anywhere along the
He
line?
worked with my brother around.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
And he worked on a group of people that were sent to Pontiac to design the A car.
Mm.
I was in that group, and he was in that group.
No, that's the original,
Original Cutlass,
the little one.
yeah,
Okay.
about 73,
Mm-hmm.
or about
No,
63.
the 61 one?
Yeah,
Yeah, the aluminum engined one?
yeah,
Yeah, 61.
yeah. Stemple was in on that.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody knew he was going places because he was pretty capable.
Mm-hmm. Now, go ahead, Mel.
Was Mr. Stemple a nice man to work with?
Yeah, he was very nice.
The 61 then switched to the small cars, Don. That was part of your task
Yeah.
too?
That was the first car that Oldsmobile designed a suspension, and all the other divisions used it.
Mm-hmm.
And Pontiac designed the rear suspension, and all the divisions used that.
Okay.
And then we worked on front suspension mainly and steering and stuff like
Mhm.
that. And we, we always worked on steering pretty heavy and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that.
In the earlier days, we in essence designed the whole car.
Yes, we designed it up until that time, I would say.
Mhm. So 61 was kind of the switch to the.
That was,
When we went to the intermediate.
yeah,
car.
they picked out people out of the organization that knew what they wanted, I guess, and they sent them down to Detroit. We worked at the Pontiac back room, the auditorium. We worked in there, and Stemple was in that group, and I was in the group, and
Mhm.
a bunch of others were in there too.
What were you doing?
Well, I was working on front suspension mainly.
What was the back room sort of thing? Was that to make the coordinated design?
Yes, that was, there was a group of Oldsmobile people working in a bunch, and a group of Buick people working in a bunch, and Pontiac and
Mhm.
Chevrolet. Chevrolet worked mostly on the power line and stuff like that.
Okay.
They were kind of spoiled because their production was so high that a couple cents to them meant a lot, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And this production wasn't that high. They had to get used to a little different kind of arithmetic
Mm-hmm.
there. But they done a good job, and all of them done a good job, I would say. Probably that's the way to do it. There isn't any use of building 5 different suspensions. But we always stuck to the front end of the
Mhm.
car, and we were the handling group, you might say,
Mm-hmm.
steering and front suspension like that.
Well, when did you first begin working on the front wheel drive Toronado or the design of a car that would be a front wheel drive?
Well, that
car?
was about 2 years in advance. There's the group over there. The people who worked on that. Belts had that picture taken.
Mm-hmm.
He told us all to wear 2 suits that day. We came in and he says, I want to get a picture of everybody that worked on the Tornado. So that's the group.
When was that taken?
That was taken, that's #1 car
Uh-huh.
there. And that car is still in
That's
existence.
the car that's down at the museum, isn't it? I
Yeah,
think.
that's the one.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Of course, one of the unusual things about the Tornado was that Oldsmobile built more front drives than ever been built before anybody ever owned one, because they built 10,000 and drove every one of them before they,
Were those all built in the engineering shops
no, they were built in production.
on production?
But the
Okay.
engineers drove them.
Okay.
They had a troop of about, maybe 20 engineers who drove the 10,000 cars.
Mm-hmm.
Well, when did you first begin working on the design?
About 64, about 2 years in advance.
What
Really?
precipitated
Well,
that
of
approach?
course, I don't know what, I think it was in Beltz's mind that they should have a front drive. But I don't know what
Uh-huh.
dictated that.
Uh-huh.
But the car was unusual in a lot of ways. It was the most forgiving car that you ever drove, for one thing.
Mm-hmm.
Why do you say that?
Well, you could drive it off the road or on the road, and it still handle just wonderful. And you go around the track, and it never shift or anything else. It was just smooth. That's all. And they tried to race those cars down in NASCAR, but they were too expensive, I guess.
Yeah.
Come on in, Nancy.
Go.
We got a tape machine running here, so.
Don't put me in.
You'll be in it automatically. Don, what part of the Tornado, you were body
Oh, I was
at that time?
more or less the coordination engineer at that time.
All right.
I was in the magazine that they made it the car of the year. They said that I watched tempers and timetables.
Or like,
Okay.
Yeah, that was.
Were you the caller of the meetings to keep things on schedule and all of those things?
Sometimes we told Belts usually called the meetings, but we
Mhm.
told him we needed a meeting or something like that. But if they got behind schedule, we began to tell him that we were in trouble. And that's one reason that, see, I had all the computer people at that time
Okay.
that there was in the organization. And that was in 66.
Mm-hmm.
See, that was my last job, I guess, because I know that we designed the 71 car, and I was violently opposed to the station wagon because they had the exhaust pipe running under the rear axle,
Yeah.
and I still oppose that.
Good place to squash
Yeah,
it.
yeah. I think that was a foolish move, but I don't know. I got a 72 station wagon, and I drove it for 10 years, didn't I? I drove a 72 Vista Cruiser about 10 years. That was one I was going to give to the REO's museum, and I'd set out here in front of the house for about a month, and they didn't show up, so I sold it to
So you got rid of it.
I sold it to my son Jim, or gave it to him. So,
Maybe it's put to better use there.
yeah, might be. What's that?
The $1.
Yeah,
Oh, yeah.
you saw that.
Yeah. We had a nice discussion about the dollar bill.
The best invention I made was the one on the dual center steering, which they're still using.
Okay.
That was mine.
Mm-hmm.
When did you make that?
I designed that in I think about 39.
That's with the two,
The dual center
the
steering.
two
was mine,
links instead of the one in the center.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And Buick had gone to Haltenberg, which was cheap as could be, but it
Mhm.
was cheap in every way. It
Mhm.
scuffed the front tires pretty bad.
Mhm.
That went from the pitman arm to the right-hand wheel, and then off of that tie rod was the one that went to the left-hand wheel.
Mhm.
So when the thing went up and down, when the wheels went like this,
Yeah. Mhm.
and it was terrible.
Mhm.
So my job, that was given to me by Youngren, and my job was to develop something that was better than that,
Mhm.
didn't cost any more than that. That's when I got the dual center steering. And I probably wouldn't have come up with that, except that Youngren liked what he saw. He said, put that on my car, I'm going to Florida next week. So then Thorne came around, he says, I understand that you're driving that contraption that Perkins cooked up for Florida. Youngren says, yeah, that's right. He says, I told him I'm going to drive it. That's one I'm going to drive. But that helped me quite a little.
Mhm.
Yeah.
To get back to airlift for a moment, John, why didn't they continue that?
It's still in operation.
But we don't call it airlift, it's the principle.
Oh,
still
the
same?
airlift, as far as Olds is concerned, well, they almost got in it later because when we went into business, well, we got the price way down, but those bags, they had reinforcement on the ends as originally conceived, and they cost about $16 a piece.
Mhm.
That would be $32 a pair, and with your normal markup, that'd be over $100 a set. See, well, we bought them for $4 a piece and sold them for about $16 or $18 when we got in the business, and we were quite successful because Raymond Firestone took the sketches that he got here at our place and went down to his factory. He had him make a sales prospectus on them. And he said, he sent me a 29-page report that said that in 2.5 years of good development, it should achieve 70 sets a year, which should be a good business. We achieved 70 sets a year in about a year and a half.
Mm.
And it was about less than half the time that he wanted us to pursue it, you know.
Mhm.
And the reason was that he had the price too high,
Mm.
and he didn't realize that how much it was being used on the racing cars. Racing cars were using it advantage.
I remember a lot of racing cars had airlift on the side of them.
Yeah, we had one time that, we had an Oldsmobile in 52 that won the Darlington.
Mm-hmm,
That was the first Oldsmobile that won a 500-mile race.
mm-hmm,
That belonged to airlift.
mm-hmm.
And we the way we won the thing, we cut the tire consumption down from about 7 sets down to 2
How did you do that?
by keeping the car from leaning into the turns so bad.
Stabilizing it
Yeah.
better? Uh-huh.
See, that was on Darlington. Darlington's like dropping marbles in a bottle.
Mm-hmm.
You got to be right on line, or you don't get around those curves there at Darlington. We went down there one year, and they had some of these old Oldsmobiles that we used to see run there. They had them in the museum.
Mm-hmm.
Did you get into the racing end very much?
Yeah, I got
When was that?
when I was experimental engineer, I got friendly with some of the racing people. Metzel didn't like it very well, but Wolfram egged me on all the time.
So we actually were encouraged then to be a part of that,
Well, he said, keep it up, but don't let anybody touch you at it.
but keep it quiet.
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
but then the corporation had to change their part, and they openly admitted they'd like to see some race cars win.
Mm-hmm.
And so Bob Dorshimer got in it with Lee Petty as the contact in the racing business. And he won the first Daytona race, which was a $1 million deal.
Mm-hmm.
He, Bill France had built that track down there, and he tried to beg people to buy stock at $1 a share. And when Lee Petty took the only Oldsmobile that there was in the race and won it the first year it opened, well, the stock went up to $12 a share, and there wasn't any available. And Bill France became a millionaire overnight on that deal. And instead of fooling around with the litter baskets, I should have been in the racing
Right,
business.
right.
I told Elsie that one time. I said I should have bought about 199 shares of that. They would allow you to have 10,000 shares, you know, or under 10,000 shares. They wouldn't bother you, but we had too much invested in airlift at that time, and that's the reason they accused us of having a conflict of interest.
Yeah.
But I should have taken Bill France up and bought some of that stock. He's a very rich man today, but he's run that track now for
Long time.
59.
Yeah,
Next year will be 30 years.
yeah.
29 years now. It's run that.
When we were racing a lot, Don, did we send our guys out to
No,
tracks and things at all, or
no.
did we?
Wolfram flew with me one time down to Palm Beach.
Uh-huh.
And I remember he asked the guy down there who was a Olds dealer, he said, supposing we win this race today, what'll happen tomorrow? This guy looked him right in the eye and he says, tomorrow, Mr. Wolfram, they want 88 on the used car lot.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
but that's the way they felt about it. They had to have that to win. And a winner was all they were after. They didn't care how they got it,
Uh-huh.
but they worked hard at it.
Did we then provide assistance to the racing guys?
Well,
Is
we
that-
put out a package and
Okay.
we had a little hand-to-mouth assistance too. But we put out 6 cars in 53 and we put the package on.
Okay.
And we sold those cars to selected people, which I told who to sell them to.
So did we actually make the car then
Yeah.
special to do that?
Cars were delivered to them with the stuff in them. And we won Darlington, and we got we won Daytona,
Mm-hmm.
got second place in Daytona and won the measured mile.
Uh-huh.
And then we won the West Coast. I've got a picture downstairs of Herschel McGriff who had one of the cars. And he just had it covered all over with trophies.
Oh, see.
He won everything he got in at that time with that car. But Herschel came into town one time when they had the first Detroit race. He got a brand new Oldsmobile and he got about a half a lap down there and he got run into and he just smashed it all to pieces. So that's the sad part of racing.
Yeah.
But
Did we have then motor engineers working on it too, and so that
Well,
you get hopped up engines?
yeah, we had a good camshaft
Mm-hmm.
and we had a good guy working on the camshafts. And then we put them in a package and we would sell them to them, which was allowed at that time
Yeah.
under the rules. You could develop a package to protect yourself. That's what we were doing. We were putting out a wheel package because the wheels were collapsing on this tight tracks.
Mm-hmm.
We went into Toledo one time, we saw a car run there just off the street, and it went around about a half a lap. The wheels folded up, it rolled over, and it was pretty bad. And you had to see them run to know what they needed.
Mm-hmm.
So we got out, I went down to Daytona about maybe 6 times on my own. And I got criticized for it quite a little for going down there, but I went in and just because I wanted to see it.
Yeah. You say Metzel did not want to participate in those things?
Metzel blamed me for wasting time.
Huh.
But he liked the winning just like anybody else did.
Now, is that when he was chief engineer?
That was when he was chief engineer, and then he went on to be general manager.
Well, tell us a little bit about him. Then we haven't talked about him much. What
Well,
kind of an
he was
individual?
pretty capable guy, I think. He was a lot different than Wolfram was, and he succeeded Wolfram at the job of chief engineer.
Yeah.
Of course, at that time, when Wolfram was our general manager and Metzel was chief engineer. But he, on one of these reviews, which I had never seen, I saw it on Kinnig's desk, and Kinnig was assistant chief engineer on my side of the fence, and he was my boss. And Metzel had written on there that Don spends too much time at the racetrack. And so I didn't like it very well. I put some comment on there, and then he said that I wasn't able to take constructive criticism. And I didn't think it was very fair what he said about it, so I put the comment on there and said that I spent a lot of my own time down there besides what time I'd spent with the company. And I got results too. But we, out of these 6 cars, we got good results on those. And they probably cost us the least of any project we ever put out. Because the only thing we did is we furnished the kit, the solid lifters and the camshaft and the wheels and the racing tires. That was it. It probably cost us $1,000 a car for 6 cars. And
Was that the only year we did that?
well, we
Or we do that every year?
did that only in 53.
Mm-hmm.
54, then we had a bigger engine, and we rented the Indianapolis Speedway to test that engine. And that answers some of your question, Alan, about we went down to Indianapolis and we run 10,000 miles on the Indianapolis track nonstop. We even gassed the cars on the go.
That was in 54.
That was in 54 when we went to the 324 instead of 303.
Uh-huh.
And we put in a higher gear in that car, and we done it to see whether the bigger engine with a better gear was more economical than the other, and it was. It proved to be quite a advancement. But that brings up the point that I wanted to make, and that is that Indianapolis track in the summertime used to be the most desolate place you ever saw in your life. It was growing up with weeds. It was terrible. And you just sick to see it in late July or
Well, it
something.
only gets used once a year.
Yeah,
sort of,
that's
so.
right. But it grew up the rest of the time. They trim it down, dress it up for the track. And I had never seen it in the summertime except that time.
Hot too, wasn't it?
Yeah, hot, terrible.
Yeah.
We had the first intercoms on the cars. Elsie was down there with me. We stayed at one hotel and the crew stayed at another one. We went out one night and we'd been to the show. Elsie and I picked up the radio off the car. The first thing we heard was one of our men say, "I wonder where the boss man is tonight." We hadn't seen him. And said he must be out galvanizing or something like that. And I picked up and I says, "That's what you think." Everything went quiet.
So they had little two-way radios.
Yeah, but we had those intercoms from then on. They still use them and they're very good. Now we've got them so you can talk 25 miles.
Yeah.
And that's pretty good because we had a racing guy down in Richmond, Kentucky, and we stayed in Lexington, and we could talk to him all the way home.
Hmm.
And Kenny went with him one time, and he thought it was quite unusual that we could talk to him clear to his home and back.
Don, did you work with Lord Carroll?
Yes.
What kind of a man was Mr. Carroll?
Well, he was quite a well-trained man. He was very exacting. He was critical of what went on. If he didn't like it, well, he spoke about it. One time I was down to Detroit with him, and Ed Cole, president of General Motors, asked me a question. I answered it and thought nothing of it. Carroll reprimanded me on the way home about answering the question. He said that either he or Belch should have answered the question.
Oh my goodness.
I said, when the question is directed to me and I'm the only one who can answer it, I think I should answer. And he didn't like it very well. But we got along and we were good. That wasn't an argument or anything like that. It was a little discussion. He just said that he thought that he should answer it, and I said, I don't think so.
Difference of an opinion.
Yeah.
Well, did you work with, you mentioned Gilbert Burrow, what about Gib Butler?
Yeah, Gib Butler was the camshaft man that I mentioned about. That
You had a good
he
camshaft.
designed the camshaft for the. And I've seen Gib Butler a couple times. I saw him a week ago or so. He's still around town.
Oh, yeah.
He's been
We've
to the
seen him a
history
few
center a
times.
couple times.
He was a very smart man. I think he was responsible for a lot of our horsepower. And because he knew what it took to design a cam.
Harold Owles, did you
Yeah.
work with him?
Yeah, I worked with. Because it's easy on everybody.
Well, hopefully, that was the intent.
What?
Yeah.
So, but
Well-
where were we now? We
You
were
were
on
talking about Wendell Owles?
Wendell Owles,
I thought
yeah.
he just had the one son, Wendell.
No, he had a,
Yeah.
what was this, what was Ford's name? Ford that sold the building for us? J Ford. That's his son. He works in real estate for Westlake.
J. Ford?
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
I think Wesley Owles is a different Owles. That's Oles.
No, what I'm thinking about is Harold Owles.
Yes.
Yeah,
But his son was Wendell.
yeah. Harold Owles' son was this Jay, or
Oh, was it?
younger one.
Oh,
I think he had two sons.
nice.
I think this is the one that, I had never met him before until he sold a house for somebody that Jim bought a house from him once. Our son bought one from Jay. And then when the building came up, he wanted to try to sell it and I told him, go ahead. He sold it in a few days.
Don, did you get involved in any of the war stuff during the Korean War?
No. No. I got a call from, a year ago, I got a call from, chief engineer, what was his name?
Our chief engineer?
Yeah,
Oh, See, that was not Dorshimer,
No, it was that,
Ron Haas.
no, it was after Dorshimer, it was,
Ted Lucas?
Ted Lucas,
Oh,
yeah.
okay, that's.
I got a
all
call
right.
from Ted Lucas.
Mhm.
He wanted to know about the 442, how it was developed. I told him what I remembered about it, and but actually, I told him first the same thing I've told you, that most of those projects were upper echelon projects, and they weren't handed out to the peons like we were.
And they started up there instead
Yeah.
of starting down below and
Yeah.
coming up.
The Belts handled things a lot different. He handled the Tornado the way that I said,
Mhm.
and they had a good group designing that, and I think everybody on the team was good at their own line, and that's the reason that we believe it's a pretty good car. And
John Belts was a different kind of guy too,
yeah,
wasn't he?
he was a good guy to work for.
Was he, did he let you have freedom, so to speak? to
Yes.
Do things?
Mhm. He knew that, you see, under Wolfram, I was experimental engineer and Belts was my assistant.
Uh-huh.
And then eventually Belts came to the top. And I thought that was good because I thought he deserved to be there. He run through the door one time down in the garage, the sliding door, you know.
Yeah.
The guy was visiting there and he made him wait, so Belts just put the car in gear and just went on through.
Really?
Yeah, tore the door right off. And he didn't say anything at all. He just went on through.
My goodness. Where was that? At the proving ground?
No, I was down here at the engineering.
At the engineering
West
building?
end of the engineering?
Oh my goodness.
He was nice,
Most
very nice.
anybody but Belts would have been fired, but he wasn't fired.
Uh-huh.
He was praised for it, I think.
Did you know John DeLorean?
Yeah.
What can you tell us about him?
Well, I can tell you one thing, that he's quite a gentleman, as you know him personally, I know that. And I was surprised at some of the things he done. I got his book right down there.
Mhm.
So it's, I read it, I've read a couple books on him. But I'll tell you one thing about John DeLorean. It didn't make any difference what kind of a meeting you were in or he was in. If he saw you, he'd greet you by your first name. And it didn't make any difference who was around there. I remember one time when we went, it was just before I retired, and I went to the proving ground to a big General Motors meeting, and the president of General Motors was there and a bunch of people. And I felt somebody grab my knee, and I turned around, and here was John DeLorean. He said, "How you doing, John?" But he would recognize you that way anytime that he saw you. If I would go into the Waldorf Astoria in New York tomorrow and see him, he'd call me by name.
Isn't that something?
You have memory.
Nice to have a good memory
Yeah.
like that, yeah.
Yeah.
Basis.
Yes.
Well,
Well,
you made an impression, obviously.
Yeah, he was, I think he went off the deep end a little with his car thing and with his the life that he was leading and like that, but that's not for me to say that he
Right.
could do it or not. But he was a gentleman in all ways, I think.
What do you think of our quad 4 engine, Don?
I think it's quite nice. Tried to get one,
Oh, did you?
yeah. When I found out that it took about $33,000 to get one, I decided I'd better drive my old cars. I went down to Indianapolis to see it run last year, mid-year. Lucas had one and invited me to go, and I thank him for that. But we saw it run track down there, and of course we'd seen a lot of cars run that track, and it looked good just running along there. It looked like it was awful fast, but he only got 189 miles an hour out of it.
Mhm.
He expected to get over 200 out of it, I guess. But it just didn't perform that day the way it should have.
Mhm.
Was it in the Aerotech?
Yeah. There was two of them there. everybody thought it was one, but there was two of them, and they tried both of them, and
Mhm.
Oh,
they got 181 out of one of them, and 189 out of the other one. And they look just alike, these two.
do you think that's a coming engine of the future?
I think it's, in principle, I
Some
think
of
it
it's-
is, yes.
Component.
Hmm. I think it's a good engine. I think it's wise to put it in. You're hearing that from a guy that had two diesels.
Right. Fortunately, you didn't have much to do with that.
I had a diesel here in Lansing, and I got rid of that one, but I've got one in Florida yet, and it works fine down there in warm weather. But it's a good car.
Is the gas mileage that much better?
Yes, the gas mileage is above 30, I think. It's very good. And ever since the car was new, it's performed real good. But my son-in-law, who works at Olds, had driven a Tornado down there with a diesel engine in. He got stuck in Fort Wayne when it got cold.
Mhm.
He couldn't get it started. And they had to hire a garage to heat it up to get it going. That's how bad it is in the cold country. Of course, I had mine in the garage out here
Yeah.
in
Next door
the
with it.
winter time,
Yeah.
and it worked pretty good in the summertime. It wasn't too bad. I sold it to a neighbor up the street, and he's still got it, I guess. But I've got one of them now. Mr. Lane wrote me about my 85. I've got an 85 station wagon,
Mhm.
just a Cutlass Cruiser.
Mhm.
It's a good car, except the air conditioning just works spasmodically. And
Right, mostly during the winter.
you know, mostly when you want it most, it don't work. But I went up to Dan Burns' Olds about 5 or 6 times, and every time I got up there, it worked all right. So they couldn't find anything wrong with it.
Naturally.
And I finally discovered what was the matter. It was the wiring harness that feeds the compressor.
Oh, the clutch?
It would allow it to stop.
Oh.
And then it would stop. Elsie drove it a few times and it would stop on her, and I'd have to show her how I jiggle the wire to get it started again.
You don't get your hand in there.
She finally got the treatment down where she could do it herself.
The Perkins treatment.
Yeah. But I had a little hard job of telling Mr. Lane that the thing was still doing it, and that they had done the best they could there, but they couldn't catch it malfunctioning. And I went up to see I stay in Boca in the winter, in this winter time. We're going down there pretty soon, as long as we can get our tooth programs taken care of. But anyway, they don't have any agencies in Boca, so you have to go up to Del Rey.
Mhm.
And that's where Dan Burns is, and he has an Oldsmobile agency up there. He has a pretty good organization too. And he tried to find it. So I told him what happened, and he said, well, if you get along with it, well, you better stick at it.
Mhm.
But I didn't tell Mr. Lane that. I just told him that he'd never been able to find it.
Mhm.
We don't want to tire you, Don. We did want to mention too that in connection with this oral history interview program, we're having pictures taken.
Mhm.
Would you have any objection to stopping by Leavenworth Studios and having them take your picture? It only takes about 5 minutes. Do you know where they're located?
Well, West,
Yeah, West Street, 929 West Street, on the corner of West and
Olds
Olds
Avenue.
Avenue.
Just west of the plant.
yeah, I know High Marple pretty well.
Well,
no,
of course,
it's
he's
not-
gone.
Yeah,
Oh,
not
is he
there.
gone?
He's
Yeah.
gone, but his partner, Roger Betcher,
Uh-huh.
and you probably.
Yeah, I think I would recognize it.
Yes, if we knew, like, within maybe next week sometime, if you wanted to do that, if you let me know, I'll just alert Roger that you're coming, and then they'd be all set for you, and only
Okay.
take about 5 minutes to stop in, and then we would make that a part of the file with your
Right.
your tape.
And capture that. So.
Yeah.
Never taken very good pictures.
Oh, well, it's
I don't let him take my picture.
Well,
I looked some of the younger pictures
You
that we
can't-
have taken and I
you are
don't
what,
think my picture.
you are what you are, and so
Yeah.
that's,
And it's nice to have a picture, I think a portrait, like Roger shows the lights in the right way, it really shows your personality, and yet it discounts anything you don't want highlighted.
Well, I'll be glad to go over there.
Well, thank you,
Yeah.
we'll, you have a day in mind now, I could check for you to set up an appointment, or you wanna give me a call?
Next week, anytime would be all right.
we're gonna be gone on Wednesday and Thursday, so, but we don't have to be there, but,
I can, you can use our phone if you wish, if you wanna give them a call.
well, we can pick a date probably.
I'm just gonna give you one of our cards here, so you'd have our telephone number. And we're getting some new ones made, but that's their telephone number. In fact, I guess we could shut them off.
I shut her off here, Jane.